Welcome back to our course on Project 2013. We're now going to get started on putting together a project, and we're going to use as our example the building of a house. Now, you may not be very familiar with house building, but don't let that worry you too much, because even if you don't live in a house, you've probably seen houses and you must have some idea of how they're built. For instance, you'd understand that you need to build the floor before you build the walls, and you need to build the walls before you put the roof on. We're going to start with a very simple model of how to build a house, and then we're going to develop that throughout the course. In this section and the next couple of short sections, I'm going to introduce you to the most important basic features of Microsoft Project, and then throughout the rest of the course we're going to add a lot of detail to all of those things. Now, I must admit that in the early stages this is going to seem like an incredibly simple house, and in fact it's going to seem as though it's a pretty cheap house to build, but as we develop our project further on, you'll realize that things aren't quite as simple or quite as inexpensive as they appear early on. The other thing to bear in mind is that as we're working away, particularly through these earlier sections, I'm going to show you one or two ways of doing things, and later on I'll show you the alternative ways, or many of the alternative ways. So you may find that if I do something in a particular way early on here, you may prefer one of the ways that I show you later on, but I don't want to get too bogged down in showing you all of the alternatives all of the time, so I'm going to go for pretty straightforward options to begin with. And the first straightforward option we're going to go for is I'm not going to be tempted to search for a template for building a house. I'm going to start with a blank project. So on the start screen, Project 2013, just click on blank project. Now, I said I was going to use a very simple model for building this house. So the first thing we're going to do is to prepare the site. Now, when you're entering the sequence of steps that have to be followed to do something, the sequence of steps that constitute your project, you can actually put them into Microsoft Project in any order you like. Even though I know that I'm not going to put the roof on first, I could put roof on as my first task, and then I could sort out the sequence later. But it does make a lot of sense to do things pretty much in the order that you intend to do them in the project. And the first task in this project is prepare site, so I'm going to enter that task into the project first. A very simple way of entering a task into a project is to click in where it says task name in the table part of the Gantt chart view there. You can see it now highlighted, and just type in prepare site as normal, just using the keyboard. That's my first task. Now, when I've finished entering the name of that task, all I really need to do is to click in, say, the task name cell below that one, ready to put in the second task, and then a couple of things happen. First thing you notice is that a duration is added by Microsoft Project. It says 1 day ? And also a start date appears. So let me explain what's going on there. Now, as we'll see later, it's possible to tell Microsoft Project 2013 quite a bit about what your defaults are when you're entering a new project. The way that my current installation is set up, and probably the way that yours is set up, is that by default durations are assigned with this little question mark at the end. And what a question mark indicates is that this is an estimated duration. Now, by default here, every task that I entered will have an estimated duration of 1 day. And what I need to do if I want a duration to be something different from that is to click in there and change that duration. Now, I'm going to use for all of these tasks in the initial version of this project a duration of 10 days. Now, that's not correct, and we're going to see how to change that later on, but we're going to start with 10 days. So I'm going to allow 10 days to prepare this site. All I need to do is to click in where it says duration, and then I have these little roller controls on the right that I can use to step up or to step down the duration. And in fact, I can click in there and just type if I wanted. So I could click to the right of 5, hit the backspace key to delete, and then just type 10 days. That now means that that task has a 10-day duration. Now, before I click away to actually change that to 10 days, note that on the right I've already got a bit of Gantt chart bar there that shows a 1-day duration. The M indicates M for Monday, that's today, Monday, March the 25th. And when I change that to 10 days, watch what happens to that bar. I'm going to actually click back down where I clicked before. Now watch what happens. That particular task now shows a duration of 10 days in the Gantt chart. Now the next thing I need to do is to correct the fact that I'm actually a little bit late setting this project up, and I should have had it in place 3 weeks ago. So whereas as I've entered this first task it's defaulted to today's date for its start, that's Monday, March 25th, it should be 3 weeks ago. Now to change the start date, it's pretty straightforward. All I need to do is to click into the start cell here where it currently says Monday, March 25th. But as you can see, the positioning of this vertical line here, this separator between the table part and the chart part, is not quite in a good place. That's going to happen a lot. All you need to do is to hover over that with the mouse until it becomes that double vertical line with the little arrows sticking out of the side. Click with the mouse, assuming you're using the mouse. Do it with your fingers if you're using touch, and I can just drag that line to the right just to make it a little bit easier to read that date. I then note that the table itself, this column in the table, is not quite wide enough. So again, if I hover over the top, I get a vertical line with a couple of arrows. Again, just drag it a little bit to the right. And generally speaking, when you're dealing with all of these types of view in Microsoft Project, you're going to need to adjust the widths of columns and this separator between the two halves of the view in this case in order to be able to see everything. Now your display is probably showing a different amount of a project to mine because it will depend on the resolution of your screen, whether you're widescreen and so on. So if you can't see what I can see, if something's missing, if something's running off the screen, just get used to adjusting the settings, the widths of the columns in the way that I've just done. So now back to what we were just doing. Let's go back into that start cell here, click on the cell, and there's a little drop down at the right of the cell, and that takes us into a date picker. Now notice that with the date picker I can move by months using these two little arrows here and then click on a date that I want. I said I'm 3 weeks late with setting this project up, so I'm going to change that 25 there back 3 weeks. It should have been Monday, March 4th. Click on that. That's changed my start date. Now note, when I created this project, Microsoft Project automatically assumes a start date for the whole project. And in this case it's saying you move task 1 of the project to start Monday, March the 4th. This is before the project start date of Monday, March 25th. You can continue and move the task to start before the project start date, or you can cancel and do not move the task. Now I'm going to click on OK, continue, because I want this project to start on that date, and in a little while we'll look at how to change the project start date. So having put in the first task, the project start date has been set, and now I'm going to need to change it later on, but we'll come back to that a little bit later on. We'll just click on OK and Microsoft Project is happy again. Now note that because of the time display here, I can now no longer see that task. If I go down to the scroll bar, the horizontal scroll bar at the bottom of the Gantt chart, and just click a little bit off to the left, I can go back to see the bar for the first task in the project. And there it is. Now before we put in the second task in the project, a couple of things I want to point out. One of them is that there are various other pieces of information that are automatically entered by project as you're setting up the tasks in your project. One of them is task mode, as you can see here. We've talked about manually scheduled versus automatically scheduled before. By default my system is set up to do automatically scheduled, so if I click in there, click on the drop down, note that it says auto scheduled, not manually scheduled. If I wanted to change it to manually scheduled, That's one of the places that I could do it. Another very important point here is that when you enter a task, it's given an ID number. This is ID number 1. Now, I'm going to talk about task IDs later on, but as we'll see, task IDs are very important. And now the thing we have to do, and I would normally do this before I'd even put my first task into a project, we need to save this project. We need to make sure we keep it safe. And on this course, I'm basically going to be using 2 folders for projects. One of them that I've shown you already, that's the one with the example files for this project, and ultimately this project will go in there. But I also have a sort of scratch folder, one that I'm going to use just for intermediate working and 1 or 2 special cases that I'll be looking at. Now, you can save your copy of this project, assuming you're working along with me, anywhere you like, of course. I suggest that you don't overwrite the files that came with the course. So I suggest you also have some sort of scratch folder, something you can use temporarily whilst you're working your way through the course. So, pretty simple to save a project. File, click on Save As, and then you'll have a number of options, maybe not quite the same as me, but one of them will be computer. And then you'll need to browse to a folder where you're going to be able to save your scratch files, your working files. So I'm going to click on Browse, and then on my computer I'm going to double click on this folder, and this folder, which is currently empty, is the one that I'm going to keep my working files in. Now, the default file type for a Microsoft project file is MPP. There are some others that are relevant. We'll come back to those later. I'm going to call this particular project, I'm going to call it House Build, and then I'm just going to call it House Build 1. Click on Save, and my project is safely saved on my computer. And then also, if you look at the top of the screen, the title of the project has changed to housebuild01.mpp, which is the file name for this particular project. So that's one task set up in this project. Now, before we move on to add some of the other tasks and look at some of the other aspects of setting this project up, I want to just click on that row in the Gantt chart again so that it's selected. You can see the ID highlighted on the left there. If I right click to get the contextual menu, then 3 or 4 items from the bottom, one of the options is information. Click on information and it brings up a very important dialog, which is the task information dialog, which contains all of the key information about any individual task in a project. Now, there is a lot of information here. The information is arranged into pages or tabs that are accessed using the tabs here. So we have a general tab, a predecessors tab, a resources tab, an advanced tab, notes. We can even set up custom fields. But let's go back to the general tab and look at the general tab first. The task has a name that we can change. It has a duration that we can change. It has a little checkbox on the right here, estimated, that indicates whether the duration is estimated or not. It has an indicator to show how complete the task is, percent complete 0%. That means we haven't actually started it yet. We've then got a pair of radio buttons, schedule mode, manually scheduled, auto scheduled, a priority, and then we can also see the start date and the finish date. Now, these and the other properties of a task we'll be looking at in great detail later on. But for the moment, for any task, if you bring up that task information dialog, it will contain pretty much all the information you're likely to need about that task. So there we are. The task information dialog is very important. Let me just cancel that. Another way of bringing up the task information dialog is to just double click on the task, and by default you get the task information dialog. That's it for this section. I'll see you in the next one.
Hi everyone, Simon here from Simon Says It. Thanks for watching this video. If this is your first time here, I'd love for you to subscribe. Every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, new videos are uploaded to the Simon Says It channel here on YouTube. Just click on the subscribe button right over there. If you're interested in taking your Microsoft Project 2013 training to the next level, you can get 19 hours of Project 2013 training offered by Simon Says It. Just check out the About section below this video with more details. We'll see you next week with additional videos.